Inventory is still really high, and sales dropped off last month. So suddenly, everybody's talking about lowball offers. But is that actually a winning strategy? In today's market report, I want to unpack the numbers, but let's also talk about lowball offers and whether or not buyers who use this technique are making the right move, or maybe they're hurting themselves by using a strategy that might be out of date. I'm Sean P. I'm a real estate agent living in Victoria, and I make YouTube videos to help people understand how to navigate our market. If this is useful, please like and subscribe so you don't miss anything that we have coming up. And also, if you have plans involving real estate, I'd love to talk with you, so you can use the link in the description to get into my schedule. Okay, let's start by unpacking the numbers. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. We finished August with 3,600 homes on the market. Now, that's not a huge shift from the previous month. We finished July with about 13% more homes. So we actually had less homes at the end of August on the market than we did in July. It's not surprising because fewer people list in August. Typically they push it off till September because it's traditional for the market to pick up a little bit in the fall when kids go back to school. It just makes sense in terms of lifestyle to give it an extra month. The issue isn't the inventory though. We've been carrying a lot of inventory through a lot of this year. It's been an impact on our market, but the concern is always the absorption rate, how much of this inventory is getting picked up every month, because it's the balance between those two that really sets the stage for what the experience feels like to a buyer shopping in our marketplace. And the sales dropped a lot in August. Now, again, it's often common for sales to drop a little bit in August. It's kind of the time of year where people just really fight to unwind a little bit before getting back into the hustle bustle. But we dropped to 525 sales. Now, that's about a 23% drop from the previous month. That's a very low number. And when you contrast that amount of sales with 3,600 pieces of inventory standing in the marketplace, what it means is that our inventory, if we didn't add any more homes and we just continued to chew through it, would take us about 7 months to eat through at the rate that we were selling them. Now, we finished the previous month with about 5.5 months of inventory. So this is quite a spike to see in just a single month's time. Well, when we look at all this, it creates this atmosphere where buyers in the marketplace wonder if they're making the right move making an offer on a property. They might think if this continues, sellers will become desperate and they could get a better price in the fall. And that's a fair thing to think. With the challenge though being that we don't know what the fall is going to hold. Sales typically pick up and that could knock that balance right back to where it should be. And frankly, with the fact that the Bank of Canada has another rate announcement coming September 17th, there's a lot of speculation that the market could be pretty heated this fall. There are a lot of people who believe with inflation as it is right now that the Bank of Canada will most likely be announcing a rate cut, and that will almost certainly spur some extra activity. Nationally, markets are typically not doing the best, especially higher priced, larger urban centers like Toronto and Vancouver. Toronto's down on price year over year, 5%. And Vancouver right now is sitting on 36% more inventory than it does typically at this time of year, though their reports speculate that they actually think things are starting to turn around. So we sit at this moment where there's some bad news right now in terms of what the current numbers show, but there's a lot of reasons to think that it could pick up soon. And buyers are thinking that opportunistically, this could be a moment where they might be able to either prey on a weak seller, or maybe they just feel like they should, get a bit of a good price if they're going to take the risk of jumping in. So we're starting to see lowball offers pop up. But the issue still remains, is that actually the right strategy to choose as a buyer? And as a seller, if you receive an offer that you think is a lowball, what do you do with it? So let's start to unpack lowballs. And I think it makes sense first to start with what a lowball is. Well, a lowball offer is an offer that comes in significantly below market value. I think a good guideline is if you are 10% or more away from what fair market value of a property based on current comparisons should be, then that's a lowball offer. What a lowball offer is not is an offer that's in the range of true market value on an overpriced property. If a seller prices their property well above what reasonably it should be worth based on comparisons, and you bring in an offer at market value based on your research, They might perceive it as a lowball, but the reality is you're not lowballing, you're just offering what fair market value should be. So is this actually a technique that should work? Well, the reality is it does sometimes. Lowball offers can work when a property is experiencing challenges selling and you bring an offer that solves their problem. So if a seller wants to sell, but they're struggling to get their property off the market and they're in a position where they actually need the money and the time frame is growing constrained, a lowball offer might solve the time frame problem for them and allow them to move on from the property even though they didn't get as much as they really think it should. So it is possible to be successful lowballing. The challenge is that most sellers don't wait until they're under extreme pressure to sell quickly to get their house on the market. Usually people see these things coming a little bit in advance and they'll list in advance with enough time that they can manage everything smoothly and they take the risk out of it for themselves. What this means is that it typically takes a lot of tries to make lowballing work unless you're in a marketplace where the entire market has ground to a halt. Now, I started out the video talking about months of inventory, and the reality is we are sitting on a lot of inventory right now, but prices haven't responded yet because frankly, we're not really in trouble right now. It's typical for things to be slow in August. And if this were to carry on for several months, there could be some downward pressure for certain sellers. But the reality is that we've got still what is a very healthy marketplace. So while we're starting to see these kind of offers come forward somewhat more often, they're still not prevalent and most of them are unsuccessful. While lowball offers can work sometimes, they also come with a host of challenges. The first of which being they are just labor intensive. The reality is that the majority of sellers won't be in a position where they're forced to take a lowball. And so you'll end up going through the entire process of choosing a home, planning and researching, writing an offer, only to be pushed back by the seller. And ultimately, it means that you end up having to walk away from a lot of properties, which just eats through a lot of time and will extend your shopping process. The second problem with lowball offers is that they will typically offend the seller. So this makes negotiations really challenging. And even if you fall in love with the property and decide that you're comfortable paying fair market value for it, usually what ends up happening is the seller's not going to want to work with you because they think you're just trying to trick them, or otherwise you're going to somehow waste their time after you tie them up with your offer. So even if you change your strategy, most of the time they're going to just tell you to beat it. The third problem with lowball offers is, in my opinion, the most significant. You need to find properties that aren't getting attention otherwise. And these tend to be the properties that are less desirable. So when you commit to only working a lowball strategy, what ultimately ends up happening is you end up chasing the leftovers of the market. The more desirable properties, so long as they're priced somewhere near the range of true market value, will typically draw offers, especially in a popular area like the one that we are in now. And so what ends up happening is you'll end up only really being able to expose yourself to properties that are less desirable. Now, that has some opportunity to it because you might be able to scoop up a property at a great deal, but it's not going to be the best property. You're going to get a great price on a crappy house. Whereas a lot of the time, the better long-term strategy, especially if you plan to hold long-term, is to get the best property. Even if it costs a little bit more, over time, it's going to appreciate so much more because the house that's the ugly duckling or comes with a host of problems or is just in a terrible location is never going to be something that matures as well as the properties and products that are the top of the marketplace. The good news is there are some strategies that do work. Now, the first one that I'm going to say is watch for stubborn sellers. Sometimes sellers will price their properties above market value and they'll be reluctant to drop their price. Usually it's an ego thing. They think everyone will judge them or make assumptions about them if they lower their price. Now, I'll leave what the reality is out of this, but these properties can be a significant opportunity because you are in a position where you're often going to be the only one looking at it. And if you can negotiate it down below market value, you're going to be the only one who knows it's available at that price. So watch for properties with high days on market that aren't getting the attention they need and see if you might be able to get a deal that way. Another strategy that can be successful is to negotiate based on fair market value, but then renegotiate if things come up during the inspection process. Now, this only obviously will work if there's legitimate issues in the inspection, but if during a showing you look at the property and there's several things you can suss out that you don't think were factored into the price, that can be a way that you can knock the seller down to a more reasonable range of value. The third thing that I'm going to say is I really think if you're shopping for a home, you should focus on getting the best home, not just the cheapest. And I know that I'm repeating a little bit here, but I've been in this for decades at this point, and the people that I've seen do the best in real estate are the ones who have found and held the best properties. Focus on getting prime opportunities. Now, what should you do if you're a seller and you receive a lowball? Overall, I'm going to say that most of the time, this is far too personal to be able to give you a general rule that you can follow. You should really sit down and look at your timelines, your goals, and the numbers and figure out if it's something that you should consider. And if you're working with the right agent, they'll be very helpful in helping you get a bit of perspective on what to expect from the marketplace. Now, there are a couple scenarios where it might actually make sense to work with a lowball. The first one being where it solves a problem for you. You're the seller who is running at a runway and you need to make something happen fast. Well, in that instance, it might be something that you should really consider. The other one, though, is a little bit less simple to give a general rule surrounding, but it's something that comes up a lot. Sometimes a lowball offer is worth considering if it allows you another opportunity. Now, I've seen this with purchasers of mine where we got a property well below what I think it should have sold for, and we got it there because the seller had another property in mind, and that property had a limited time frame. They wanted to move on, and the offer, though it wasn't quite as high as it could have been, allowed them to do that. If you're in a position where you've got your eyes on something, sometimes it's worth it to give up a little bit on one of the transactions if it lets you win on the other side. All right, so what's next? Where's this all going? Well, the reality is that we'll probably continue to be steady like we have throughout the course of this entire year. And if you look back over it, things have been very consistent and predictable. We are sitting on a lot of inventory, but that's also kind of what happens in the summer. And there's a good chance that we'll just kind of move into September without much changing. Now, if we do that though, and if we look back over the past few Septembers, well, we haven't really seen huge jumps in sales figures last year or the year before either. And if we do that and we continue to sit on this much inventory, there's a fair chance that buyers will continue to be reinforced in this reluctance to be aggressive, and it could cause prices to start to slip towards the latter half of this fall. These things don't typically happen too quickly, and I'm not expecting major changes. This is a possibility. But the other possibility is that the Bank of Canada is going to make a rate announcement that rates are coming down on September 17th. And there's a lot of speculation that they're going to do this. This could really offset the trajectory of what we're seeing right now and where it feels like things could be going. And so again, we're at this moment where there's a real tale of two options as to where the market's going to go. Now, in my last market report, I made a prediction that this was the moment that you could scoop up a fair price on a great property, and that people who didn't take the summer as an opportunity might end up regretting it. And I still think there's a fair chance that that's going to happen, but it's very possible that things could go either way based on the current statistics. So I continue to think that the smart buyers are going to be focused more on strategy than on any one opportunity or trying to get a great deal. Because again, I don't think that the great properties are going to be the ones that you can get a great deal on. All right, that was a fun one. Now, as always, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It really helps us, and it's a great way to make sure that the right eyeballs end up finding our channel. Now, if you're trying to figure out how to navigate this market, we should have a conversation. I'd love to chat strategy with you, and there's a link in the description you can use to grab some time in my calendar. Thank you so much for making the time to watch this, and we'll see you on our next video. Cheers.